Când războiul face insuportabilă situația dintr-o țară, oamenii obișnuiți vor să plece de acolo ca să se salveze. Doar că cei mai mulți nu reușesc să facă acest lucru, deci trebuie să rămână și să supraviețuiască după posibilități. Însă acest tip de conflicte durează mult, iar resursele care țin populația în viață se epuizează repede. De aceea, cel mai important sprijin vine de la reprezentanții ONU, adică cei care aleg să rămână în zone periculoase ca să-i ajute pe cei aflați în nevoie. Gilles Michaud este responsabil cu siguranța și securitatea la Națiunile Unite. Discutăm împreună despre cât de dificil este să inserezi măcar puțin bine într-o mare de rău. Sunt Cristina Cileacu, începe Pașaport Diplomatic. Gilles Michaud, Undersecretary General for Safety and Security for United Nations, welcome to Diplomatic Passport.
No, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Cine are grijă de civili când izbucnește un conflict armat? Cei care l-au provocat? Nu, pentru că sunt preocupați să își consolideze puterea. În plus, în acest secol, cei care folosesc violența ca să ajungă să conducă țări nu o fac în numele unui ideal național comun, ci în nume personal. Ca atare, poporul se găsește în situația în care, de frica armelor, trebuie să accepte lideri care nu îl reprezintă și cărora nu le pasă de oameni. În orice haos este și puțină ordine, iar cei responsabili de supraviețuirea și susținerea populației din astfel de zone sunt reprezentanții Națiunilor Unite.
There are many dangerous places in the world, and these kind of problems appear only for some people to take local power. When problem appear, the local population is neglected. The United Nations appears to solve as much as possible from the problems of the local population. How difficult is to work in such conditions?
Well, I think that we've seen over the course of the last few years the environment in which the UN operates changed significantly. We've seen crisis over crisis simultaneously that occur globally. And the challenge is always for us to make sure that we identify the needs of the population and making sure that we can reach them. And I think that's one of probably the biggest challenge, because my job is to ensure that the UN personnel can do their work safely, and this means reaching the population in need, delivering programs, delivering humanitarian aid, development work as well, and that UN personnel can do it in a safe and secure way. So when we look at areas that we talk about Ukraine, we talk about the Middle East right now, we talk about Sudan, Mali, the Sahel region, those are examples of where the UN continues to operate in spite of insecurity, and that's the work of my department in supporting that type of program delivery.
Usually when there is political instability, and the area you mentioned, some of them are quite unstable when it comes to politics, the security instability appears as well, and to work in that region also supposed to know that something might change suddenly. And this year we witness some coup d'etat, we witness sudden wars like the one in the Middle East, for instance. Is it a risk that the UN is taking, considering that everything can change in a second?
Well, I think it is a risk, but it's a risk that the UN needs to take. Because when you look at risk from a security perspective, sometimes the risks of not doing something is higher than the security risk. And I think the reputation of the UN hinges by its ability to, what we say, stay and deliver. And I think those are the challenges that we face. But again, those risks are worth taking, because by taking those risks, the UN saves lives. And that's what we're all about.
And if you don't take those risks?
I think if we don't take those risks, that means millions of people will suffer, continue to suffer, and many of those will die. This is why for us it's so important that we continue to operate in those environments, even when there's political instability, and it's for us to try and find ways of working in that environment.
Zonele în care combatanții au decis să pună pauză războiului, dar nu printr-o pace clasică, sunt cele în care ONU trimite misiuni de menținere a păcii. Asta înseamnă că militarii din diferite armate internaționale, dar și civili, prin prezența lor, stabilizează situația dintr-o astfel de regiune. Mai precis, ei joacă rolul de intermediar și comunicator, pentru ca cele două părți aflate într-un conflict mocnit să nu ajungă din nou la violențe.
There are currently around 12 peacekeeping missions under the UN flag all over the globe, but there are also voices saying that this type of missions are not efficient. How do you describe them?
Well, I think what's important when we're talking about peacekeeping mission, that's a decision of the Security Council. So those are the 15 members of Security Council that decides when a peacekeeping mission should start and when a peacekeeping mission should finish, should end. So it's less about what the UN, from a secretariat perspective, thinks, but more so what member states expects from its peacekeeping operations. Definitely, whenever a peacekeeping mission is deployed, it's because the context is quite difficult and challenging. And most times it's about protection of civilians. But again, I think the notion of the usefulness of peacekeeping missions, that is decided by the Security Council itself.
And under these peacekeeping missions, there are those PSYOPs. Usually the officers from the United Nations are simply walking on the streets, talking to people, trying to be as friendly as possible to make them solve their differences, but in the same time they have to deal with the mentalities of these regions, and we all know that nobody knows in how long it takes to change a mentality. So how can we describe this, somehow, the efficiency of these peacekeeping missions?
I think that through your question, you've hit the nail on the head. It's a question, these peacekeeping missions, it's not necessarily to change the mentalities, but it's to understand the communities in which they're asked to operate, and then working with these communities to find solutions. So it's not about the UN imposing something on communities, but it's understanding the environment and working closely with the communities in coming to solutions to the problems that they're facing.
Retragerea haotică a americanilor din Afganistan și reinstaurarea talibanilor la putere a trimis evoluția acestei țări înapoi în Evul Mediu. Lupta pentru putere între armata oficială din Sudan și trupele securității naționale au transformat capitala Khartoum într-o zonă de război foarte periculoasă pentru civili. Astfel de locuri sunt cele din care toți vor să scape, dar întotdeauna rămâne cineva care se ocupă de cei mulți, care nu au posibilitatea să plece dintr-un infern de acest gen.
Extreme violence is also a phenomenon that UN has to deal with because it's spread in many areas where United Nations is operating, and usually the UN personnel is also affected by this extreme violence. When something like this happens, is a radical decision taking, like closing the mission or going home? How it works?
And this is where I think that the work of my department is so important and crucial, because we have to find ways for the UN to continue to operate in these environments of high threat and high risk. In every part of the world where we have the presence of extremist groups, terrorist groups, non-state actors, organized crime, organized criminality, the UN continues to operate. It's only in extreme situations where a decision would be made to evacuate. But what I can tell you from my perspective as the person in charge of safety and security, our best security comes with our presence. And what I mean by that is that the mere fact that the UN is present, continues to serve the population in need, it buys us credibility with those communities. It allows us to have community acceptance and to continue to operate. So for me, continued presence is an important factor in mitigating risks from a security aspect. And I'll give you the example of Sudan.
Okay.
So on April 15 this year, when the conflict erupted between the SAF and the RSF, yes, we evacuated Khartoum, but the UN never left Sudan. We've never left Sudan. So we stayed in Port Sudan, we stayed in other parts of Sudan, and for us it's been waiting for those opportunities to be able to move in other parts of Sudan where we can bring humanitarian assistance to those people that have been displaced, those who are in need. So this is why, again, we may have relocated, but we've never left Sudan. And I think that's the approach that we prone within the UN system. It's important for us to continue with our presence. And it would be in only in extreme cases where we would leave a country.
And is it easy to deal with the new rulers when a power is changing? Of course, the new rulers want to show that they are stronger than the previous one, so usually they impose conditions. Is it easy to work with these people in order to keep up the mission?
Well, I think it's always a challenge. That's a main challenge that we have, because then we need to understand what their objectives are, but they need to understand what the UN does and understand our principles. So the international humanitarian law and how it works, and sometimes it's misunderstood because from our perspective, when you look at the international humanitarian law, is that the UN needs, not just the UN, but also international NGOs and local NGOs need to be able to reach the population in need wherever they are. And any limitations that are imposed by host authorities goes against the principles of IHL. So for us, it's really to develop that understanding of what the UN stands for, how we operate, and making sure that they, as a governing body, enable that. Because when you look at the UN Charter, member states, by the Charter, are responsible for safety and security of UN personnel. That's where it starts. So we utilize that obligation that they have in order to establish expectations and negotiations for access and continued presence of the UN in these conflict areas.
Yes, but when there is a coup d'etat, for instance, or a war starts suddenly, does anyone even care about the UN Charter?
I think that it's a question of anyone who leads a coup d'etat wants to take governance of a specific country. And in taking governance of a specific country, there are obligations. There are obligations from an international perspective, and they have obligations toward their population. And I think this is where the notion of the dialogue that exists or needs to exist, where the UN is there to help the population in those countries, and hence trying to establish that understanding that is required. But I've got to admit that in many instances it is challenging to get to that point.
UN is also working with local population in this type of areas because, of course, people, as you said, need to understand your mission and need to understand what you do. There were cases and there are international reports in finding local population collaborating as well with, let's say, radical people in the area or other type of terrorist organizations. What do you do in this case?
In this case, we will collaborate with whoever has control of an area and can give us access.
Including terrorists? Including
groups that might be defined as being terrorist organizations, non-state armed groups, where they control parts of countries or whatnot. We have dialogues with them in order to gain access. So the UN will deal, negotiate with whomever has control over populations in order to help the people in need.
But usually this type of radicals don't really care about people. Most of the times they use the local population to serve their own purposes. Is it difficult to have such a negotiation? I mean, what are the arguments in order to win the negotiation?
You use the word win.
Yeah.
And it's winning hearts and minds. And for them, and I say them, those groups that might be viewed as being radical or terrorists, they need to win the hearts and minds of the local population. And for us, we're in the same game. We're in the same game. So I think this is where these discussions occur. In some instances it works, other instances it doesn't. And I'll give you an example. I think the Taliban, when they took over Afghanistan in 2021, August 15, 2021, when they took over, within 2 weeks I was in meeting with the de facto Minister of Interior, someone who's got a bounty for him by Western countries. But being the de facto Minister of Interior, their obligation to protect UN personnel and our premises had to be explained to him, which was accepted. And for him to come to understand that with that role comes responsibility. And I can tell you that from that aspect, those responsibilities have been taken seriously by the Taliban leadership when it comes to safety and security of UN personnel. Many other things the Taliban have done that the UN doesn't agree with, but when it comes to our own safety and security and our operations in Afghanistan, they've been very supportive. But that's an example. But then again, the mission of the United Nations is to protect and secure the life of the local population, which the Taliban don't really respect in this sense. Is it possible to have this type of negotiation as well? I mean, they allow you to work in Afghanistan, but then again, how is your work happening in Afghanistan? I think that it's all part of diplomacy. It's all part of negotiations. Yeah, there are some elements of our mandate that we're able to deliver and deliver well, while others that it's more challenging and where there's a difference of opinion. But through that, it's only continued dialogue that will get us through those issues. You are in Romania now, and of course, since you came all the way from United Nations and also visiting so many countries in order to work for the safety of security and security of the UN personnel, I have to ask you what is the purpose of the visit in Romania? How are we involved in what United Nations is doing all over the world? Romania has been a key partner of my department for years. We have over 160 Romanians employed in the UN for safety and security of UN personnel. That it be in peacekeeping missions, special political missions, also in my department as well as security professionals that provide advice to decision makers. And my visit here is to build from the existing partnerships. PGS is a key partner where basically they deliver training for us. They also provide some of their close protection officers when in need, and when I've got gaps and I need a quick close protection team to deploy to protect senior UN officials. Every time that I've called upon PGS to assist, it's been yes. And it's, for me, that has been crucial, because when I do need the deployment of close protection officers, it's because it's in very high-risk environments. And through their deployment, they allow senior UN officials to engage in the type of dialogue that is required in order to address the needs in specific countries. So for me to spend a day and a half in a country like Romania is an exception. But I think it speaks to the level of partnerships and how Romania has been so great through me in supporting the UN operations globally for a number of years now. Well, you have a lot of experience in this area, and I have to ask you, how come we become so good in security? What's your personal opinion, since you said you have so many Romanians working in this field with you? I think it comes from the quality of training. The quality of people that are employed either in their military, in police agencies from which the PGS recruit from, but I think it stems also from shared values, and the values for the betterment of humankind. And everywhere that I've went where I've had to interact with Romanian security professionals, the word professional comes to mind. Because they're the consummate professional. You can see the level of dedication that they exercise in their daily work. And for me, that is key because it's a question of credibility. And that's why turning to Romania for support when it comes to security, people who are involved in security to provide advice, analysis, and protection, it has never failed us.
Gilles Michaud, Undersecretary General for Safety and Security at the United Nations, thank you so much for this interview.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Atât pentru astăzi, dar rămânem în continuare online pe pagina de Facebook a emisiunii și pe contul nostru de X. Revenim cu subiecte noi din lumea diplomației și a politicii externe vinerea viitoare de la 11:30 și în reluare sâmbătă după miezul nopții. La revedere!